And I've got to say, I love that song. I mean, it's just a good one. And if I don't know where I'm at or I speed up, I just say, this is the way. And it works. And it seems like you're right with the tempo as I'm still learning it. But I think it's going to be one of my favorite songs. We just have to comment before we get into our material that Brother Santana introduced for us, Maintain Fine Conduct as Families. Just how much we've been enjoying the week and what nice support we've had. On Wednesday we had almost 50 out in the ministry. Today about 40. And we're setting a high standard. You guys have done it to yourselves, because we normally see, we know that many have to work during the week, and so we know most will be out on Saturday. I just want to remind you of how many you had that supported the ministry on Saturday of the last visit. I don't know if you remember, but it was 106 were out. Now, we expect you to beat it this time. I'm sorry. It's just how, even though it may, and I'm going to say the word, rain. Yes, I know, but now we're going to see if you're fair weather Christians or not. We'll just find out. No, and we know if your circumstances allow it, you'll be with us. No pressure on you, but we'll enjoy a nice meeting. We won't make you do anything crazy, we promise. Now, we did also promise on Tuesday evening we'd give you a couple of the highlights as to what's happening in the congregation. Currently, we're counting 132 active publishers. We've had a few more that have moved in, so you're actually around 136 as soon as we get some publisher cards noted in the files. So, like we mentioned, I mean, people can move out, but you just keep growing. Even internally, you're having babies. So, I mean, there's many ways to make disciples. We understand. But a lot of good things happening. In fact, our average, too, you stayed pretty consistent there, about 9 hours on average per publisher in the congregation, about 6 magazines per publisher, 3 return visits on average per publisher, and about a quarter of a Bible study. So a lot of good things happening. And your meeting attendance, in fact, we're seeing the midweek meeting attendance rise, and that's really our goal, isn't it? With only having the one midweek meeting, we like to see actually the attendance percentage-wise midweek match what we have on Sundays. Because we understand that we need that time together. And we know you'll work on that. We want to give you just one specific thing to work on, though. As opposed to burden, we know you're doing what you can in the ministry. You're doing what you can at the meetings. But we want you to just open up for just a moment to Proverbs chapter 2. And verses 1 through 4, even verse 5, probably this entire chapter very well. But there's just one point. We'll highlight, the whole chapter really does this. It's a beautiful chapter about the attitude and the effort we should put forth in really coming to know Jehovah's way of thinking, in trying to serve Him wholeheartedly. And just note verse 11 for the sake of time. It states, thinking ability itself will keep guard over you. Discernment itself will safeguard you. Now, you notice that it doesn't say rules or laws will safeguard you, but thinking ability, discernment. In other words, what we want you to work on, and we know you're already working on it, but just continue to put forth effort in this area because it will really safeguard you in the days ahead. Rather than looking for rules or laws, there are plenty of them in the Scriptures. We even have some organizationally. But if you ever have trouble submitting to a rule, a law, even a suggestion that comes through Jehovah's theocratic arrangement, we want you to go to what's really of value in it, the principle that it's based on. And this is what we want you to work on, because those who love godly principles thrive under Jehovah's sovereignty. So when you get counsel like we did on Tuesday evening about appropriate use of alcohol, we look for the principles involved. Because when we understand the principle, we're motivated to really apply or work with whatever guideline or standard we might have. It can be anything. It could be even something as simple as what we discussed at our special assembly day in part, online social networks. You look for the principles involved. Because sometimes we'll hear things, you hear a suggestion in an area, you make an application of something, and sometimes we'll dig our heels in. It's how we are as humans. I mean, it's just part of imperfection. And we say, well, when I see that in print, and then we never look for it in print. We never go research it. We never try to figure it out. And we don't look for the principle involved because those principles are really what's life-saving. So that's all we want you to work on. Just work on being individuals who love and appreciate godly principles. Because when we know the principle behind a standard, a rule, even a law, and then we're motivated to comply with it. So we can do that, right? I mean, that's just the one thing we'd like you to work on, and it helps in all other areas, too, of our theocratic routine. Now, with all that said, we want to turn our attention to that specific theme, maintain fine conduct as families. And as we do so, we want you to picture in your mind's eyes, maybe you've traveled to some of these places, maybe you've seen them on Discovery Channel, but we want you to picture some of the world's tallest mountains and the true alpine areas. We're not talking like alpine meadows, but we're talking above the tree line, the true alpine areas of some of the tallest mountains in the world. And if you've ever seen any of these, let alone if you've been there and experienced some of these conditions, you know that on the tops of some of these mountains exist the harshest conditions known to man. And think about it. The average temperature of the year is well below freezing, and we mean literal freezing, not Southern California standards. But below 32. The growing season, what little bit there is only about a month long. Most of the precipitation falls as snow and then is often blown away in gusts of wind that exceed 200 miles per hour. Now you add to that double the amount of UV radiation that we get here at sea level, and we get the idea. It's a very inhospitable alpine environment. And yet in that inhospitable realm, there is one form of life that thrives despite the harsh conditions. Now, every spring, these delicate, stunning, absolutely beautiful, colorful alpine flowers, they push their way through ice and snow, and they literally burst onto the scene. They're magnificent. If you've ever seen pictures, let alone if you've ever seen them in person, I mean, you look at them, and they stand out as these sharp, bright spots of colors in a definite contrast to that tundra-like environment around them. Now, the survival of those delicate flowers in those harsh circumstances, it illustrates a couple of things to us. Number one, it illustrates our Creator's diverse wisdom. And it illustrates something else. We want you to think about the world in which we live in. You know, today, couldn't we say that we live in a world that is also cold, it's extreme, and it's harsh, much like those mountaintops. In fact, we live in a world that has an environment that's very hazardous to the growth and development of beautiful, blossoming Christian families. And we'll just be honest with you. We go from congregation to congregation each week, and we see the toll that this world's environment is taking on Christian families. We see it every week. You know, sometimes, we know how it works. Sometimes we'll see families and they're raising children, and we know how it works with children. When children are young, they're most malleable. They are eager to please. But then as they grow, there's this natural push and desire for independence. And if that's left uncultivated, unnurtured, uncared for, sometimes we'll see young people who don't blossom any longer. You know, that can happen. Or on occasion, we'll see couples, husbands and wives, who have been married, some of them for many decades, some just a few years or a short period of time, relatively speaking. And we'll see these couples that were once one flesh, we see them begin to drift apart. You know, as well as a number of other circumstances. The environment that we live in, it's not conducive to the development and growth of beautiful Christian families. But the same God who produced the alpine flower, he proved something to us. He proved that he supersedes environment. In other words, he doesn't care what's going on in the world around us. If we will yield to the principles and the advice found in his word, we can have families just as beautiful as those alpine flowers are. Now, if that's the case, then what's expected of us as Christian families today? Turn with me to 1 Peter. 1 Peter, and we want you to look at chapter 2 and verse 12. In fact, we could say that this is our theme text for our discussion. 1 Peter chapter 2, and we'll wait for everybody to get to verse 12. And as you're turning there, if you're thinking, well, this text doesn't bear directly on families, you're right. But in principle, it does. And that's what we're going to take and lift out of this text. Now, notice what we're told. Here's our admonition. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Maintain your conduct fine among the nations, that in the thing in which they are speaking against you as evildoers, they may, as a result of your fine works, of which they are eyewitnesses, glorify God in the day for his inspection. So there it is. That's our goal. This is the goal of every individual Christian, and this is the goal we have as families. We want to maintain our conduct as children, as wives, as husbands, as parents, in a fine manner, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it makes us a lot happier. It makes life a lot easier and more peaceful. And number two, as we're told here in 1 Peter, it provides a beautiful, blossoming, colorful witness, a testimony that glorifies our Heavenly Father. Now, the original language in this text is very interesting. In fact, the Greek word for fine is kalos. And it has a much different connotation than how we use the word fine today. And think of it, we use the word fine all the time, don't we? And how do we normally use it? Someone asks you, well, how you doing? What do you say? I'm fine. Do you need this? Do you need that? No, I'm fine. Now, when you say, I'm fine, in response to any of those questions, what do you mean by it? What are you implying? Somebody says, how are you doing? You say, I'm fine. Do you mean, hey, I'm super fantastic, couldn't be better, best day of my life? Don't even ask. I mean, is that what you normally mean? No. Normally, we mean, well, we're okay. We're getting by. We're cutting the mustard, whatever vernacular you want to use. But that's not what the word meant in the original language, and especially in this context. I appreciated the comments in one English-Greek lexicon. It said there's really no good way to translate the word kalos, or fine, into English, because it means so much more than how we use the word today in English. Because originally, what's denoted here, it was to mean something beautiful, excellent, notable, something of superior quality. So when it makes a statement that our conduct needs to be fine among the nations, what we're being told is that something should stand out as different with us as Jehovah's people compared to the nations around about. It's just like if you were ever to spot one of these alpine flowers and you see this bright spot of color against that desolate backdrop. As soon as you see it, you can't help but conclude that that is a fine work of creation. It's notable, it's superior, it's beautiful, it's excellent. And especially do we understand what the word really means and what's being asked of us as Jehovah's people when we consider how the word fine is used in other texts in the Bible. We'll give you a couple of more examples just to add a little bit of flavor and meaning to this. Now, you don't have to turn to these. You can. But maybe you just jot them down. We'll go through a couple of them real quickly. How about 1 Timothy, chapter 4 and verse 4? That's where we're told that every creation of God is fine. Now, what does that mean? That every creation of Jehovah's is okay? It's good enough? No, we know what it means. I mean, we look at a work of Jehovah's creation, and we understand that text means, when it says every creation of God is fine, that every creation of God is superior, it's beautiful, it's magnificent, it's of superior quality. Here's another example. What about John chapter 10 and verse 11? That's where we're told that Jesus is what type of shepherd? Yeah, the fine shepherd. And what does that mean? What does that imply? That Jesus is an okay shepherd? He's adequate? He'll get the job done if nobody else will show up for work? Absolutely not. We know what it means. I mean, when it says that he's the fine shepherd, we understand that as a Christian, as a sheep in Jesus' care as our shepherd, if we were in his care, we could never be lost. We start to get the feel of this, the flavor of what the word really means and what's being asked of us. We'll give you one more just for fun. John chapter 2 and verse 10. This is where we're told that Jesus made fine wine. Now, what did that imply? What did that mean? That Jesus made okay wine? Nobody really noticed? Didn't really stand out? It tasted like a bottle of $2 Chuck? I mean, is this... No, we remember the account. I remember what the director of the feast stated. He said, this is the best wine I've ever tasted. And if we would have had the privilege of tasting the wine that Jesus made, we would have said it's absolutely, indescribably delicious. You get the idea of what the word fine means, of what it means then when we're asked, when we're admonished to maintain our conduct, and we're applying this to families, fine among the nations. Now, with all that background in mind, we'd like you to turn to this next text with us. Go to the book of 1 Timothy, please. 1 Timothy chapter 3, and you'll recognize this Bible book and chapter as the qualifications for those serving in an appointed capacity within the congregation. But really, we could say that these traits, these attributes, these qualities are the same traits and attributes that any family head would want to be manifesting. Now remember what our definition of fine is, and drop down, if you're in 1 Timothy chapter 3, drop down to verse 4 with us. Notice what we're told. It says, a man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, having children in subjection with all seriousness. Now, I don't know about all of you, but after we have that definition, we look at those other verses. I mean, this kind of raises the high bar for what it means to preside over our families in a fine manner. And if you were a family head, we'll just ask you that question directly. Do you preside in a fine manner? Is that how your wife would describe you? When she looks at you, does she say, you know, he's absolutely indescribably delicious? Or does she just say, you're indescribable? You know, I mean, it could go either way, couldn't it? I mean, you get the idea of what we're talking about. In other words, the word fine in Greek, it does not mean average, even though that's the way we use the word today. And I think sometimes we do that because we take protective shelter in that, don't we? Not necessarily in the word fine, but we take protective shelter in being average. Nobody wants to stand out too much. Nobody wants to be too high. Nobody wants to be too low. Everybody just wants to blend. We want to be average. If you're a family head right now, a husband, a father, maybe you're thinking, you know, well, I'm doing the best I can. I don't know what you want from me. I'm just an average father. And we understand those comments in their context. But what does the essence of the word fine mean? I'll tell you what it means. The word fine means not settling for mediocrity. There's no room for mediocrity in our role as any family member, no matter what our God-assigned position is, because it takes more than mediocrity. It takes more than just being average. It takes kalos. It takes something beautiful or of superior quality. And this is what Jehovah's asking us to work at. Now, we know it's difficult because the world around us tries to get us to conform to its mold. And the world around us tries to promote the idea that you just want to be average. You just want to blend in with the world and its standards. Even in the medical profession, they do this. They just want you to blend, right? I mean, you get a blood test back, and what do they show you? The medium range. You get your cholesterol back, and what do they show you? They show you the high, they show you the low, and if you are somewhere in the middle, you think, woohoo, I'm good, I'm average, I'm safe. But you've got to be careful with that type of reasoning, because the average person dies of a heart attack. The average person in many countries will get cancer. The average person around the globe will suffer from some form of mental disease or defect. Yeah, all of a sudden, average doesn't look good anymore, does it? You're thinking, I don't want to be average. And we don't. We want to be kalos. We want to be beautiful, excellent, of superior quality in our Creator's eyes. And this is what Jehovah is asking us to work at, because no creation of Jehovah's has ever been average. I mean, think of it. Everything we study about Jehovah, it just knocks your socks off, doesn't it? And the more we learn about things He's created, the more awestruck we become. And family is one of His creations. Jehovah wants us to work at this, and He's given us the tools to do so. Now the question becomes then, what's needed? And why is it so challenging to have fine families today? Because we know our intentions when we get married. Think of it. Think back. If you've been married for a little while, think back to when you were courting or dating. Now, when you were dating someone, and you married this individual, and you think back to when you were dating, you had an absolute determination that you were going to make marriage and family life a success. And the day you take your vows, more determined than ever. But then in some cases, 5 years later, we're sitting with the same couple trying to keep them together. You know, what goes wrong? You know, when you're dating, You communicate every day, don't you? In fact, in many situations, you are convinced that you will die if you don't talk to that person every day. And you just have to. People try to keep you apart, and you find a way to communicate and talk to them, to see them. I mean, every day. And then 5 years later, you don't talk to the person just to prove you can live without them. I mean, how does it go so far, so fast? What makes it so challenging? What we want to do is just look at a couple of things that Jehovah mentions to us. In fact, what we're going to do for the next few minutes is look at what we think is probably the two greatest challenges in a marriage between husband and wife. We're going to look at one for the husbands and one for the wives. Let's examine both of them. So turn to Colossians chapter 3 for a moment. Colossians 3, and we hope you sisters don't mind if we start with you. You know, it's nothing personal, but you have to start with someone, and you're just the first in the order of how this was penned. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 18, you're going to love this verse because it's probably one of your favorites already as a Christian woman. You probably have it highlighted. This page is wore out in the Bible. Are you reading ahead? Is that? Let's read it together. Probably the biggest challenge for a Christian woman, for a wife, Colossians 3:18. You wives, be in subjection to your husbands, as it is becoming in the Lord. So there it is, probably the greatest challenge for Christian women. Be in subjection to their husbands. Now, I don't want to just stand up here and make arbitrary statements about this. So we'd like a little input from you. Just a brief comment. We don't need any microphones, but somebody raise your hand, a Christian woman, and just, we don't want any personal experiences either, anything like that. But just tell us, what is it that makes this challenging? Why is it challenging? And we acknowledge it. You're not unique if you find this challenging. Why is it difficult to be in subjection to a husband? And why is it? Sister Escamilla?
The world encourages independence.
It really does, doesn't it? Independent attitude. So we've got that weighing on us. Sister Sweet?
Both people are imperfect.
Yeah. Boy, I like that. You included both in that. It's true. And this is what makes subjection difficult, especially for a Christian woman. It's hard to be submissive. It's hard to be in subjection to someone who is imperfect. But let me ask you this question. Do you think that Jehovah knew that? Do you think he knew your husband would be imperfect during this time of the end when he had Paul write the book of Colossians? Yeah, absolutely. He knew it. And he still said, be in subjection to your husband as this is becoming in the Lord. From his divine vantage point, he knew what the circumstances would be, and he still said, be in subjection. And we understand that when this topic gets brought up, this is not the most joyous topic to talk about for Christian women. I mean, we'll just be honest. In fact, maybe you're thinking right now, I mean, it's not like you're running through your mind, you're thinking, oh man alive, this part's on subjection is probably for me as a Christian woman. I'm so excited about it, probably a lot of counsel. I got so much to apply and work on. And yeah, probably not going through your mind like that, is it? It may even run a little counter to your spirit. In fact, let's just ask you this. As Christian women, as wives, now we don't want you to raise your hands or comment on this, but just think about this for a moment. When you hear the term subjection, submissiveness, in the marriage arrangement, what is the first thing that goes through your mind? I mean, what are you thinking right now? Do you think about being controlled, being demeaned, suffocated? I mean, is that your view of subjection? Or when you think about subjection in a godly way, do you think about security, protection, freedom even? See, because what we think about subjection is really going to go a long way in determining how we interact with the concept of it. Let's take it one step further. Again, this is a challenge, it's an obstacle. We can discuss it openly. Let me ask you this question. Who is it that absolutely detests, he hates, he abhors the concept of subjection? He's fought against it. He fights against it with a vengeance. He has vowed that he will never submit to it because he thinks that it is controlling, confining, demeaning, and suffocating. Someone raise their hand and tell me, who is that? Sister Jameson? Satan. It disgusts him. Subjection. He hates it. And where is he right now? Yeah, basically he's on death row awaiting annihilation at the end of the 1,000-year reign. So we've got that example. But then look at the other side of the issue. Who is it that absolutely loves the concept of subjection? He thinks it's beautiful. He adores it. He thinks it's the only way to find perfect protection, shelter, security, and freedom. Someone raise your hand and tell me, who is that? Please, Sister Martinez.
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ. He loves it. And where is he right now? Yeah, he's a king priest reigning in the heavens. And when you look at those two examples of subjection, you can almost get attached to the concept, can't you? And we understand that as Jehovah's people, in fact, all of Jehovah's intelligent creation understands that in this arrangement, everyone is subject to someone, with the exception of Jehovah himself. Now, we understand, and we will acknowledge once more, we can't acknowledge it enough, it can be challenging to be in subjection to someone who is imperfect. And I think all of us can sympathize with you sisters, especially if we're married and we know what we put our wives through. Sorry, Susan. I always apologize at this point, because we do. I mean, we make mistakes. We're imperfect. But the whole matter of subjection, it always reminds me of riding in a car. And maybe you've had this experience, I think we all have, and you are the passenger in the car. And let's just put yourself, imagine yourself, you're the passenger in a car, and let's say you're out on the 405. It's late at night, visibility is bad, traffic is heavy. You are the passenger in the car, and the driver, he's just flying down the road. He's going 65, 75 miles an hour. He's whipping in and out of traffic, going back and forth. Now, in those circumstances, when you are the passenger, where are your feet? Yeah, right through the floorboard, right? And your fingers? Yeah, permanent impressions on the dash or the armrest. And then you look over at the driver. And he's just whistling a tune. He got one finger on the wheel. He's almost got his legs crossed. Not a care in the world. Just calm as can be. Now, how come he's so relaxed and you are so uptight? Somebody raise their hand and tell me. I mean, why is it in that situation? Sister Hanson? He's in the driver's seat, which means that in the passenger seat, you're not in full control. And this is what makes subjection especially challenging, because we're not in full control of the arrangement. Now, think about that same example. Now, you're the passenger, those same conditions. Now, in those circumstances, as the passenger, if you were to decide, in those circumstances, you're going down the highway, the driver's in control, you're not, but you decide that you're going to take some corrective measures, and you reach over and you grab the wheel. Now, if you were to do that, and you got in an accident, who would be to blame? Yeah, and we understand that ultimately the person in control of this arrangement is Jehovah. And you know what he's saying to those in the passenger seat of the car? He's saying, stay in your seat. That's where I've assigned you. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't render very valuable input from the passenger seat. I mean, in extreme situations, you can even scream out, slow down. You can point out, that was our exit. Or the infamous, don't you think we're lost and we need to ask for directions now? I mean, you can do this from the passenger seat. You can help navigate. You can give suggestions, input. But you cannot grab the wheel and take over, because it can cause an accident within the family. Now, we know it's difficult, and again, we understand it's challenging, but we have countless examples in the Scriptures of very faithful servants of Jehovah that were blessed by him, prospered in his arrangement, even though they had to be in subjection to other imperfect humans. How about our exemplar, Christ Jesus? I mean, he himself had to subject himself to imperfect humans, even as a child. You remember the account and what happened to him when he was 12 years old? They went up to the festival, and remember what happened? Now, here's a perfect child. He's subject to imperfect parents, and his imperfect parents lose him for 3 days. I mean, how do you do that with a kid? What would the courts do with that today? I mean, it would be a huge scandal. And then when you read the account as it's listed, and they go and find him, the implication is that Mary blamed Jesus. Who was the parent in this situation? Yeah, think of it. He was a perfect child subjected to imperfect parents, and it really did him in, didn't it? He was submissive to imperfect parents, and he still grew up to be a perfect Messiah. I don't think it really had a negative impact on him. He wasn't in full control of those circumstances, but Jehovah was. He submitted to it, and our life is blessed because of his submission to that arrangement. How about later on when he started his earthly ministry after his baptism? He subjected himself to the Jewish congregation because that was Jehovah's arrangement at the time. The same congregation of imperfect individuals who would later disfellowship him on the false charge of blasphemy, have him put to death, and he couldn't do a thing about it. He didn't have full control of those circumstances, but Jehovah did. And where is he now? Yeah, as we mentioned, a king priest in the heavens, the king with incorruptibility, immortality. See, no one really loses when they start to develop a love for the concept of subjection. So we're not talking about just bearing up under it, tolerating it, or putting up with it. And we're talking about really developing a love for it as the Christ did. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, but that's very hard. You don't know my husband. And that may be true, and it's really not a question as to whether or not it's going to be difficult or challenging. We've already acknowledged that many times. We'll tell you right now, it's going to be hard to be in submission to an imperfect husband. For that matter, on a congregation level, it's hard to be in subjection to an imperfect elder body. I can tell you from personal experience, it's very hard to be submissive to an imperfect circuit overseer or district overseer. It's even hard to be in subjection or submissive to an imperfect, faithful, and discreet slave with its imperfect governing body. But that's not even the question, is it? We know there's going to be some challenging situations, and the challenges are normally internal. The question is, though, do you love the concept of subjection the way the Christ did? And to do that, you may have to pray to Jehovah about it. You may have to say, Jehovah, help me to really love subjection, because if I love it like you do, then maybe I'll be motivated to work with it, to apply it, and my family will benefit from it. I mean, does that make sense? Does that seem fair? Yeah, all the brothers are saying, yeah, seems fair to me. No. Yeah. Would you sisters like us to move on to the husbands now? It is our turn. So if you're still open there to Colossians 3, just look at the very next verse. And we would say that verse 19 of Colossians 3 is probably one of the biggest challenges for a husband today. Verse 19, here's the counsel to us. We're told, you husbands, keep on loving your wives, and do not be bitterly angry with them. So one of the biggest challenges for Christian men, for husbands today, is to keep on loving their wives. To not become bored with our wife or tired of her. To not get exasperated, let alone bitterly angry, but to keep on loving, cherishing our wife as the precious gem that we knew we had when she said yes to our proposal. That's the biggest challenge for us. Now, how do we meet that? Well, naturally, it takes a lot of prayer. Not for her to change, but heartfelt prayer to Jehovah for us to change, for us to be a loving head that she can respect, for us to be a head that cares not only for her material or physical needs, but her spiritual and, yes, her emotional needs as well. That's what it means to keep on loving our wives. In fact, Paul expanded on this just a little bit. It only took one verse for the wives. It takes a few more for us husbands to get the point. Go back to Ephesians with me, please. Ephesians 5. And we'll look at a couple of verses here, starting with verse 28. All kidding aside, you wives will remember these verses, and these probably are some of your favorites if you're married. You would probably like us as Christian men, as husbands, to read these verses every day of our lives, and probably we should. We would be better husbands, better heads of households if we did. Look at the expanded information here for us, because we read there in Colossians 3:19 that we needed to keep on loving our wives, but we're not the ones that determine what that standard of love is. And no, Jehovah tells us what the standard is, who we're to imitate. Ephesians 5, verse 28, in this way, husbands ought to be loving their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hated his own flesh, but he feeds and cherishes it, as the Christ also does the congregation. So what counsel is given to us as husbands? It says that we're to love our wives as the Christ does the congregation. And there's three things about how Christ treated the congregation. And we see this primarily by how he dealt with the apostles, some of his immediate disciples, how he deals with the Christian congregation today even, that we would want to imitate, follow his example in. Number one, when it came to the congregation, when it came to his family, Jesus was never overly critical. He didn't look for opportunities to find fault in their limitations. Number two, he was never overly demanding. He didn't expect from others what they didn't have the circumstances or the ability to give or do. And finally, even if they did make a mistake, our third point, he was never overly disappointed. You see, but he kept on loving them. He continued to do so. He didn't get exasperated. He didn't get bored. He didn't get tired of his family. Now, sometimes we know how it works, and we'll be honest. This is a challenge for even Christian men today, because sometimes a man will get exasperated with his wife. And matter of fact, maybe you've even said this or thought it. You ever had the experience where maybe you're confiding in a close friend and you say, I said something to my wife and it probably wasn't the best thing. I could have been kinder. I could have been more tactful. But I say one little thing and I pay for it for 2 weeks. Why can't she just forgive and forget? You ever said that or ever thought it? Yeah, don't raise your hand. Don't even flinch. Because she's looking. Here's what we have to understand, though, about women, about our wives. This is what we have to understand and come to terms with as husbands, as brothers, as Christian men. We have to understand that women have very long emotional memories. It's true, isn't it? They are not hysterical, but they are historical. And this is a gift from Jehovah. This is something that Jehovah endowed them with. And it's the long emotional memories of women in particular that make them the wonderful caregivers that they are. You walk into a home, and 90% of the time you can tell right away who it is that takes care of the needs of others. It's the wife. It's the mother. It's the woman. It's those long emotional memories that make women so loyal. This is a godly quality. It's those long emotional memories that keep women attached longer. Because while it is true that they may remember for a long time something hurtful or unkind that we might say, even if we say it in anger or it doesn't come out right, they may remember that. But you know what else they remember? They remember every nice thing that was done for them. They remember every good thing that was done for them. The counsel isn't for wives to keep on loving their husbands. No, it's for husbands. The wife has a natural ability to do that. It's a gift from Jehovah. Now, husbands are just the opposite, right? A man, he'll say, well, I just wish she'd get over it. And this is one thing about a man. Women have long emotional memories. Men have no memories. We just want to move on past it. We do. It's just how it happens. I'm sorry. I'm being honest here. It's just how it works out. But we can't complain, though, about our wife remembering for a long time something that we said that was hurtful because she's simply using a gift that Jehovah gave her. And here's the secret. If you don't want to experience that, don't say something hurtful. And if you do, be man enough to apologize. Because there is this myth, this misconception, this outright lie that the world advocates, and it even slips into the Christian congregation on occasion, that somehow it is unmanly to apologize, to say I'm sorry, to even ask for forgiveness. That's ridiculous to think like that. You know what is unmanly? You know what's cowardly even? To not apologize. We know we're imperfect. It's no newsflash to our wife. She understands it. And it shouldn't be a newsflash to us. We can't complain about this wonderful quality that Jehovah has given her, because Jehovah himself has a long emotional memory. That's why we're all still here. He hasn't given up on the human race. He remembers every good thing we've ever done. He stays attached to us. It's Jehovah's long emotional memory that may cause him to resurrect us if we should die. So don't look at this as some negative quality in your wife. You look at it as a very positive quality and embrace it. It's what makes our wives so loyal. It adds to their being the precious gem that they are. So we can see then, with just a little bit of conversation, that the advice that Jehovah inspired Paul to provide us, it's beautiful, it's proper, and it's right. In fact, if you're still open there to Ephesians 5, we want you to just pick up on a phrase there in verse 29 when it talks about the man feeding and cherishing, and we're applying this to feeding and cherishing our wife. And that word cherish in the original language, it's also quite noteworthy. And you can look it up in Vines later to get the exact pronunciation of it. But the word itself, cherish, it was originally used as a descriptive word. The word cherish, it was used to describe a bird that would spread out its wings to keep its chicks warm. Now, do you think a husband who really cherished his wife, who would spread out his wings or spread out his arms to keep his wife warm, to make her feel protected, to feel loved, think he'd ever want to fly the coop? Then does that take effort on the part of a husband? Absolutely. Does it take more effort as the years go on? It can, and depending on how much effort we've put forth up to this point. See, in your marriage, in our marriage, don't settle for mediocrity. Don't settle for average. In fact, mediocrity is the exact opposite. It's the antithesis of what's fine. And we don't have to settle for that. We don't have to settle for average, because Jehovah has given us instructions, principles, and advice so that we can have a really fine, beautiful, outstanding marriage, even in this hazardous environment that we find ourselves living in today. Now, of course, an intrinsic part of many marriages is children. I bet you kids thought you were off the hook tonight, didn't you? And we want you to go to, if you're still open in Ephesians there, because you've got to appreciate your role in this. And just drop down to chapter 6. And we won't spend a lot of time on this point, but just look at verse 1. And you know the point as a Christian child, a youth, a male or female, it doesn't matter. The admonition is the same. And we're told, children, be obedient to your parents in union with the Lord, for this is righteous. So there's your assignment in the family arrangement. It's to obey your parents, especially if you have the privilege of having godly parents. This is a gift from Jehovah as well. And we're going to go on, drop down a couple of verses, and we want to talk to parents in particular. And just one point we want to highlight here in verse 4. And probably many of you young people do have this verse highlighted. It's one of your favorites, isn't it? As soon as you learned to read and you had some comprehension, you began to love Ephesians 6 and verse 4. That's where we're told, and you fathers, do not be irritating your children, but go on bringing them up in the discipline and mental regulating of Jehovah. Now, there are many things that probably irritate, so to speak, our children. But you know what one of the greatest things is? What it is that irritates our children? It's when a parent doesn't practice what they preach. Now, young people call that hypocrisy, when we ask them to do one thing and then we don't do it ourselves. And that's a very strong word, and I don't know if it's even the right word, because there's a big difference between being imperfect and being hypocritical. For that matter, there's a difference between being inconsistent and being hypocritical. But that's how they view it. You know, young people, our children, if we set a standard for them, they expect us to reach that standard and just a little bit higher. And I don't think that's unreasonable for them to expect from us an example that they can imitate and benefit from. And you know what else irritates some children, no matter what their age? It's when we try to get them to do something spiritual, but we don't give them the nourishment with which to do it. It's sort of like if you had a person and he hadn't eaten for a few days, he was tired, he was fatigued, and you made him go out and do a full day of very physical labor. Now, if we were to force a person to work in those conditions, they're tired, they're hungry, they're fatigued, we'd call that abuse. It's the same with our children. We can't expect them to do something spiritual unless we give them the nourishment with which to do it with. And you know what that takes on our part? It takes time. That's what it takes. That's why members of a family, we need to work at this together. Children, parents, husband, wife. Now, I found this interesting. There was a poll taken not too long ago where they polled 1,500 school-age kids. Now, these were not witnesses. And they asked these kids a simple question about family life. They asked all 1,500 of these kids the same question, a single question. They could give up to 4 answers for it. And the question was, what does it take to make families happy today? And the unique thing about this poll was that all 1,500 kids put the same number one answer. You know what it was? And we'll give you a hint. It wasn't money, it wasn't cars, and it was not fine homes. All 1,500 kids, in their own words, basically said, spending time together makes us happy as a family. So we ask you, do you make time to do things together as a family? Do you make time for fine works as a family? Or do you sometimes find that you get caught up in the rut of being too much like the average American family? Remember, it's probably been several years ago now. You like to think it's just a few years ago, but probably maybe even 8 or 10 years ago. And when it came to spending time together as a family unit, there was this very popular phrase. Remember what it was? It was 2 words. They said quality time. And we'll just tell you, that was the biggest joke there was. Because that term, quality time, it was supposed to, in somehow, make up for a lack of quantity of time spent with our families. You know, you'd hear CEOs and those that traveled a lot, and they would brag about being able to spend 20 minutes of quality time with their children a week. Yeah, big deal. You know, quality is important, but it does not make up for the lack of quantity of time spent with our families. And we know you invest a lot of times in your family. You know, you have family worship once a week. You take your kids out in the ministry. You bring them to the meetings a couple of times a week. You invest a lot of time already. And those are very important steps in laying a foundation in any spiritual family, meetings, the ministry, and family worship. But let me ask you this question. How many times in any of those 3 settings, the ministry, the meetings, or during family worship, your kids really open up to you and maybe express a doubt, a temptation, a concern? I mean, how many times in any of those 3 situations? Yet rarely, if ever. Now, when is it that they do confide in you? Yeah, it's when you're in the car going to get a pizza. It's maybe when you're down at the beach surfing or swimming, doing something like that. It's in the quantity of time that we spend together as families that we're really able to peel back the layers of what's in a young person's heart. And that's the whole point of what Jehovah is telling us to do in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Let's turn back there for a moment. Deuteronomy 6, and we'll start with verse 6. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 6, here's the first step in the equation of raising fine families. And Jehovah encourages us, he says, and these words that I am commanding you today must prove to be on your heart. So here's the example for our kids. In verse 7, and you must inculcate them in your son and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk on the road and when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, the amount of time that we spend with our children, talking to them about the truth, encouraging them to apply Bible principles, to benefit from Jehovah's instruction, to get to know Jehovah, the amount of time that we do that has to at least match, if not exceed, the world's regularity of pressure upon them. Now, some parents think, and this, if this is your thought process, we're not criticizing you, but some think, I'll have my family study, I'll bring my kids to the meetings, I'll take them out in service once a week, and everything's going to be all right. That we can just leave it at that, and that's, again, a very fine foundation, and it's a good start. But, just those three things, those three areas, just that amount of time alone, that doesn't even come close to matching the world's regularity of pressure on young people today. Now, maybe you're thinking as we start to discuss this and we're wrapping up here, maybe you're thinking, you make this sound like a massive job, a monumental task. Good. That's what we were going for. Because it is. It's the largest undertaking that you will ever have the privilege of being involved in. And we'll just be honest with you. We've got to just be direct so that we all get this point. We want you to understand, if you bring your kids to the meetings, you take them out in service, you have your family study once a week, and you leave it at that and nothing else, do you know what you will probably produce? You will probably produce a young person with fair morals. Hopefully. You might produce a young person who believes the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. They may even feel that Jehovah's Witnesses are the church or religion of their choice. But if you just leave it at that equation alone, you will not necessarily, automatically produce a young person, a son or a daughter, who perseveres in fine, superb, notable, beautiful works. It's not an automatic. So the question becomes, how do we attempt to develop that part of their spirituality? How do we give them the best chance possible? Now, all those steps we mentioned, those are good. Those are excellent. Those are necessary and the necessary starting points. But here's the real key to it. Here's what we'd like you to do if you're not already doing this. We want you to work on creating within the home a spiritual environment every single day. And before you dismiss that thought, maybe you're thinking, yeah, right, every single day, it's hard enough to get the family together for family worship once a week. That's hard. And we're not talking about having family worship every night. We're not talking about having family worship for 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours every night. That's not what we're talking about. No, we're simply talking about creating a spiritual environment and making sure that we put forth some kind of conscious effort with every member of our household to discuss something spiritual each day. We'll give you a couple of examples of what we mean by that. We have one family head, and what he has done, and many others are following this example, is they have decided, this brother and his family, and they have some small children, that they are going to try to the best of their ability to eat one meal together at that, round or oblong thing in the kitchen, the table, it is for eating at. That they are going to come together, it takes a lot of effort on their part, and just have one meal together as a family. And then when they conclude their meal, before everybody, retreats to their little private spot in the residence, what they do is they just read something spiritual for 5 minutes. That's it. Nothing heavy, nothing counsel-oriented. Maybe point to one of the articles. They could be out of the Awake, could be out of the Watchtower. Maybe an experience from the yearbook. Maybe a particular count in the Bible. And they just read it for 5 minutes. Now, after the first 2 weeks, you know what the father said the result was? He said, as a family, we fight less. We get along more. He said, we even do it on midweek meeting night. The night that doesn't seem to have the same amount of time as all the other nights. He said, the night when we thought we didn't have an extra 5 seconds, we come together, we eat our meal together, we read something spiritual. On that night, it might even be something for the meeting, but just for 5 minutes. And he says, and you know what happens now? We make it to meetings on time. He says, because we don't fight. We get done with that, we just go get ready for meeting. We get prepared. Now, do we have 5 minutes to invest in our family each day? Absolutely, of course we do. We wouldn't think of not doing that. Or what about this? If you want to create a spiritual environment in your home each day, do you pray together as a family each day? And we're not talking about mealtime prayers. We understand if you come together and you eat, whether you're sitting at the table together or you eat in separate rooms or spread out, most of the time we pray together at meal times. But It's not like our family is hanging on our every word during those prayers. And it's not that they're insincere, but mealtime prayers, sometimes they can be a little redundant, can't they? We use some of the same phrases, and our kids, they just get used to that kind of by rote. As a case in point, we've been at many tables where you've had a little baby, maybe not even a year old yet. This kid can't even speak, and yet this little girl will know when to say amen, because she has heard the prayer for 365 days in a row. It's just, and she knows the pentameter, and you'll be sitting there, and she'll get towards the end, and she, in Jesus' name, amen. And she'll say, amen, and she'll almost nail it every time. We're not talking about those kind of prayers. And it's not that they're insincere by any means. We're sincere with those mealtime prayers. But we're talking about once during the day, gathering together the entire family, anyone who lives under our roof, anyone that we worship Jehovah with, and just having a meaningful prayer. And especially if you have children, be specific in these prayers. We'll give you 3 suggestions. If you want to make sure that your family is really benefiting from these prayers, you're creating a spiritual environment, and we're going to give you 3 things to do with your family, especially if you have children. Number 1 is head of the house. If you're going to engage in family prayer, this specific prayer, not mealtime prayer, we'd like you to ask your children ahead of time what they would like you to petition Jehovah for in their behalf. And it might be that they're struggling with some subject in school, or it could be that they're attracted to a boy or a girl and they're too young to date. And maybe there's a personality conflict with someone here at the Kingdom Hall. There's a little bit of tension. But number 1, before you pray, ask your children ahead of time what they would like you to ask of Jehovah in their behalf. And the second thing is, mention them by name in your prayer, each of them. This will make you appreciate not having 15 children. And the third thing is this: tell Jehovah in prayer why you love them. Now, if you do those 3 things, I guarantee they will hang on your every word. And you can do the same thing with your wife. Do you ask your wife ahead of time, on occasion at least, honey, what would you like me to pray for tonight? And it'll give you a pretty good indication as to what she's been praying for. And if you've never done this, or you're kind of questioning your role as family head, don't be surprised by what she says, because she might open up to you. She may even say, well, you know what I'd like you to ask Jehovah for? I would like you to ask Jehovah to help you to be a better spiritual head, because I think we're dying here as a family. I don't know how long I can continue to do this. I don't know if I have the energy or the strength to do it. Or she might say, will you ask Jehovah to help you to be more patient with me? Or ask Jehovah to help you to show me more attention and affection. I need that. Now, if your wife asks you to pray for any of those things or anything like that, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? You're going to say, nope, we don't pray for those things. Haven't you heard my prayers before? It's not on my list. Are you going to do that? No, of course not. There's nothing that we can't petition Jehovah for. And there's no area as a family head that we can't make improvement in. If you ask your wife ahead of time what she'd like you to pray for, if you mention her by name in prayer, and if you tell Jehovah why you love her in prayer, it might be the first time in her life that she ever believes a compliment. Because you know how it works, right? You try to encourage your wife, and what does she say? She says, well, you're just trying to be nice. You're just trying to encourage me. But if you say it in prayer to Jehovah, she knows one thing: you will not lie to God. And friends, you understand why we're talking about this subject. We think about the world and the environment we live in. The world surrounding our families, it has never been more corrupt. And at the same time, it's never been more tempting. It should really move us as heads of households to really try to preside in a fine way. And now you know everything that's involved in that word. You know some of the challenges and what Jehovah has given us to overcome those challenges, the advice, the admonition, and the counsel. Now, at the outset, we mentioned that from week to week we will see families under attack, and that is true. But you know, by and large, what we see in congregation after congregation, We see families doing the absolute best they can with their circumstances. We see families that are determined to maintain fine conduct among the nations. And when we look at all these families, we look at the congregation, you know what we see? It's like we're looking out at this beautiful blanket of those stunning, beautiful, colorful alpine flowers. So by all means, then, do everything you can to keep your families beautiful by maintaining fine works despite the very harsh environment that we live in.